instead. There we go. All right. So let me actually go back a slide here, hopefully. Oh, no, we're not going back slides. There we go. So that's me without a beard, but you know, pandemic changes us all. So I am Chris Welter. I'm a professor at Miami University. Mike asked me to step in for this. I helped with this last year as well. I'm excited for this program. I like what's going on with it in general. I think it's a great opportunity for all of you. I think not necessarily because I'm here talking to you, but more so because I think entrepreneurs can change the world. And I think it's vital. If this last 18 months has taught us anything, it's because we need some more change in this world in a lot of different areas. As we get started here, I've got a bunch of stuff here on the business model canvas. My process, a little bit with the sharing. I can't see the chat very well. I might be able to pop this up here someplace. I'll see if I can keep it up there. But Zaina can pop in at any moment. If you've got questions, feel free to interrupt as we go. I'm going to have us hopefully pop into a breakout session or two to have you guys talk a little bit amongst yourselves, not necessarily your team, but with some other people in the program, and work through this so it's not just me talking the whole time. But I think like you guys probably learn in anything you're working on doing makes it a little bit better. So we're going to do a little doing here today too. But any point questions come up, feel free, either ask Zaina and she can bug me or interrupt, or feel free to interrupt yourself. But we'll start rolling through here. I'm assuming everybody can see the screen. If not, I figured Zaina would yell at me at this point. So remember, we got the sponsors here, P&G, Kroger, First Financial, Taft, KMK. We're very thankful for them because we wouldn't be here otherwise. And so wanted to recognize them. What the plan is for today, you know, where we're going, we got that in a little slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about why business model canvases matter. And then we'll talk specifically, we'll spend most of our time on what's in a canvas, and then how do we use a canvas to innovate. And then we've got a little bit of homework and some few Q&A at the end. So, oops, keep going back and forth. There we go. So where we're at today, July 12th, business model canvas. You're creeping up on that final pitch competition. If you didn't feel like this was fast, or you felt like this was a long program, it will feel very fast very soon, I imagine. As we wrap up this, you'll start moving over to the pitch deck and pitch readiness, which is a talent and skill all of its own, but will hopefully reflect all the things you've done so far. And so the work you've done so far and the work you're going to do in the coming weeks, that will be really the content that you're building into a pitch deck. So you can polish things as best you want, but if you don't have something shiny to polish first, that's not as helpful. So quick question, poll number one, how are you feeling about your solutions? I know Mike talked to you guys about solutions last week. And so thinking through those, wondering where you guys are at, because having good problems to solve is important. Having solutions is also important, but sometimes those take a little longer. So go ahead and fill out that poll and see, let me see where you're at as far as what you're feeling in your solutions, whether you've nailed it, you're kind of there, but still working out the kinks. You've come to a point where you're like, hey, this is a great problem that might not be solvable. Or you've at least, you know, that famous, I think it was Thomas Edison, you know, I figured out 10,000 ways not to invent a light bulb. Whether he actually said that or whether we made that up after the fact is kind of a moot point, but you might be 10,000 ways not to solve your problem so far. So take a second there, hopefully you filled that out, see where you guys are at. Okay, so we're all having a decent idea, but still working out the kinks. That's good. Hopefully this will help a little bit along that journey, at least starting to put some more clarity to that and then start building the business around it. So let's dive in. Now this, I've got three options for you here. This might require a little bit of context before you respond, but the music industry, at least in my lifetime, and perhaps in some of your lifetimes, not necessarily in some of your lifetimes, the music industry's evolved a lot. So back in the day, we had, you know, records, and we had CDs were the thing I grew up with. And CDs were big in the early, grew up in the 90s and early 2000s. Then it switched to the Apple iTunes model, which is a very similar process in that we're getting music, but it's very different in that we're paying to download music. And then streaming music is obviously where most of us live now. So thinking about CD revenue in 2000, how big was the industry? How much money were people spending on CDs in 2000s? compared to how much money people were spending downloading music in 2011, where Apple iTunes was the dominant source of people downloading individual songs or albums, versus streaming music subscriptions and ad-based revenue in 2020. So I want you to compare those three sources. Which do you think had the highest revenue? Where do you think people were spending the most money? This isn't even adjusted for inflation, just raw numbers. The most money being spent, CDs in 2000, or was there more money being spent on downloaded music in 2011, or more money being spent on streaming music revenue and the ads in 2020? So take a guess here. Which one do you think? All this represents the vast majority of the music industry over the last, basically 20 years. Where do you think the most money was being made? All right, let's see. So streaming music revenue is the big guess, and then a few people on CD revenue. Here's the totals. So streaming music revenue, subscriptions and whatnot, $8.2 billion were spent on 2020 in subscriptions and spent on ads on Spotify as well as other streaming platforms. So that's not just Spotify, but that's mostly Spotify. In 2011, downloads was only 2.6 billion. So a lot less than 8.2 billion, but CD revenue in 2000, it was actually 13.2 billion were spent on CDs in 2000. Now, the reason I bring this up is one, remember, we were spending a lot more money on music and got a lot less of it in the 2000s, but each of these iterations represent an evolution in a business model, and in essence, a change in a business model canvas. A lot of this is driven simply by altering how music is delivered and what the typical revenue stream looks like. We're going to talk about revenue streams for a good bit of today. But if you think about CDs were delivered in physical discs or tape cassettes before that, physical products that were purchased at a store and then delivered, and the owner of that music then had some device to play it on. Apple iTunes played on computers, downloaded over the internet. Streaming music downloaded on demand, because you're actually downloading it whenever you're streaming it. You're just playing it as you're downloading it. But in each of these iterations, the downloads was the lowest revenue, but the CDs was a substantially higher revenue than the subscription model. But you see a lot more consolidation across these. So Apple iTunes brought in most of that 2.6 billion. Spotify brings in a good chunk of that 8.2 billion, but there's a lot of other competitors there. The CD revenue, I didn't have a specific company put on there. One, because I know there's some high schoolers on here who probably still wonder what exactly I mean by CD. But the other side of it is, with CD revenue, there were lots of different players who were getting a slice of that pie. So the point of this is really for you to think about how this industry has changed based on business model innovation, which can really easily be described in the business model canvas. So we're going to dive in from here into these business model canvas. So, oh, sorry, I forgot I had this slide in here. But so Tower Records was one of the big record stores that sold CDs back in the day. Then things came through available on iTunes, and now Spotify. And if you notice, iTunes is still in the game, but Apple Music is a much different idea than what the iTunes store originally was. And Tower Records doesn't really exist anymore. And this is what you see with business model innovation and changes in canvases, that you can see a business model supplant and even replace a much larger, stronger competitor. When iTunes came out, Tower Records was a much bigger deal. When Spotify came out, and Spotify and Apple Music still exist, but Spotify came out, buying songs on iTunes was a much bigger deal. And so you see these younger, smaller competitors being able to displace these larger competitors because of business model innovation, which can very well be summarized on a business model canvas. That's why I think these canvases are so important. And that's why I think they can help crystallize what you're doing, so that you know how you can compete with potentially bigger players, or how you can bring new ideas to market. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about comes from these two books, written by roughly the same people. There's some other folks involved in this. The one without the colors, the black and white one, Business Model Generation, came first. After they made a bunch of money, they splurged and put more color in it. So, more power to you. A lot of what you've heard so far comes from, in some versions, some of the things from these books. The website, you can see a little bit right below where it says Value Proposition Design, strategizer.com. They've got a lot of free resources, whether it is just a blank canvas or some other things that you can use But highly recommend either of these books if you want to reference some of the stuff we're talking about or get different ideas. I'm going to summarize bits and pieces of both of them, focusing more on the business model generation. Mike actually talked you through some of the value proposition design stuff earlier with talking about customer segments and value propositions and sort of the jobs, pains, and gains idea. We'll revisit that real briefly as we go through today. So, business model canvas. This is the slide Mike showed you before. There's a lot of different canvases. People have come up with iterations. This is not by any means gospel in terms of how we organize things. To me, this is the most clear, straightforward way. It's probably the most clear, most straightforward canvas. It's probably the most widely used. But the idea behind a business model canvas is one simple page to show you how your business works. These 9 boxes cover roughly everything you need to know about a business that we could summarize in a business plan, which we still do and they still have their place. But given the point at which you're at in your businesses and in your ideas, this is much simpler. This is much quicker, and this shows you how things need to evolve and change much more rapidly. As you change one piece, they should modify and potentially alter all the other ones. And so thinking about the design of this, I love as well. Like the book, if you get either of those books, you'll see they spent a long time on design. Value proposition sits right in the middle. That's the idea of what you're bringing to the table, the value you're creating. The things on the left side, the key partners, key activities, key resources, those are what you do to create the value proposition. And then customer relationships and channels is how you connect to your customer segments. Now, if you look, those sit on top of cost structure and revenue streams. So on the right side, all the customers, all the things you're doing is to bring in revenue, and all those customers are willing to part with their money to give you the revenue for that value proposition. The key partners, key activities, and key resources are all money you're spending, so they go into your cost structure. If you do things well, the revenue streams develop more money than your cost structure, and that's how you make money in a business. Now, we're going to walk through some of these in more detail. We're going to focus more on the right-hand side. The reason we're going to focus on the right-hand side today is we're more concerned with figuring out the people that we're dealing with as we start to understand a problem. Mike may have said this. I've heard this around Cincinnati a lot, and I think it's a great quote. I first heard it from Tim Metzner, who said, "Fall in love with the problem, not the solution." And if you're working on the problem, you need to observe the problem. You need to understand the problem from the customer's eyes. When you're developing the solution, you just get to make decisions about that. And so that's where the key activities, key resources, and key partners come in. A lot of times, just effort, doing the work, and money can solve those problems. On the other side, if you put all the effort and money and time in doing the work, but you're creating something nobody wants on the customer segment side, it's worthless. But if you know you've got a problem people care about, you can handle the other stuff later, but you really need to understand the customer first. So we're going to focus more on that right-hand side of the canvas, and a little bit we'll get into cost structure with some of those key activities, resources, and partners as we go through here. So what I'm going to walk you through is I'm going to walk you through Spotify as an example. Then I'm going to have you guys dive into an example in small groups real quickly to kind of follow this up. So as I look at any of these business model canvases, my first place to start with is starting with customer segments. And so when you think about customer segments, and I'll talk a little bit more about these in depth, I'm going to introduce each of these. For Spotify, we call them music lovers. A lot of times they're college and high school age. Now, does that mean that only music lovers, only college and high school age people can use Spotify? No, not at all. But what that means is that's who we're building it for. That's who Spotify went after initially. And I'll put the other caveat. This is the initial Spotify. So I know Spotify does podcasts now. They're doing all kinds of stuff now. We want to focus on the initial idea because that's where you guys are at. So customer segment, starting off, Spotify is looking at music lovers in college and high school age and thinking, what do they want? What do we want to provide for these people? What's the missing piece for them? And as they observed it, they thought, buying music's fine, but I like a lot of music. How can I get unlimited on-demand music? So I want to have all the music I could ever have in the world, but I obviously can't carry all that with me all the time. So how do I get it on demand when I want it and virtually unlimited amount of music, millions and millions of songs? That's what we're going to offer those people. That's what we've created as Spotify. So that's where our value proposition comes in. We could add more details here. Customer segments, we want to keep, there's a fine edge with customer segments I'll touch on a little bit later, of you want to keep it focused, but you want it large enough that you're solving a problem that matters to lots of people. If you just create a customer segment that's just you and your buddies, it's probably not going to be that worthwhile. But you don't want to go so broad that, like, yes, everybody can use this, but who are you focused on? Then with value proposition, you want to think about what's the value we're really providing. We may do lots of things, but what's the value people are getting from it? Now, when we think about those value propositions, the next question we have is, how do we get the value to the customer segment? So that's where channels comes in. So with channels, we've got, with Spotify in particular, thinking about how do people get to Spotify? Well, one is online, whether it's a website and a web front end, or whether that's app stores. Both of those are the ways we can get the channels. We can think of a lot of different ways with channels, though. In other scenarios, you know, if you think traditional music, Tower Records, the channel was the storefront. Apple Music, the channel again was online. And so a lot of these things have moved online, but there's still plenty of spaces for brick and mortar. You may have other channels such as, you know, third-party distributors or retail. If you create something you want to sell through retail outlets, Walmart may be one of your channels, or Target, or retail is what we'd probably just call those. And so there's other types of channels. You may have agents that are selling things for you. You may have, you know, sort of B2B sales directions and on-site interpersonal sales things going on there. But with channels, you're really thinking about that, hence the truck illustration there. How do we get our value to our customers? And so you want to think about when they purchase it, when they buy it, how does that happen? How do we deliver the value we've offered to deliver them? The other box up here on this right-hand side we'll finish up with is customer relationships. How do you relate with your customers? For Spotify, that's automated, right? It's not that you have a Spotify representative that's talking to you, and every time you log in, they say, oh, hey, nice to meet you, Chris. Good to see you again. What music are you thinking about today? We may have an AI that gets there soon enough, but that would still be an automated type of relationship. You can contrast that with, you know, other automated relationships or non-automated relationships. So if you go in to buy a car, that's far from automated in most cases, although you see some innovation in that in Vroom and Carvana. But if you walk into a dealership, you're having a personal interaction. If you buy things at Walmart, you know, now they're getting a combination between a self-service model, which isn't quite automated because you have to actually go in and pick things out. But then as you're checking out, that's self-service versus there may be an interpersonal relationship there. You may have sales reps, but thinking about how do you relate to customers? How do customers connect to you? Generally speaking, we think of automated, self-service, or personal interactions as the main three in there, but there could be some other ones, or there could be some combinations. Now, where I want to spend a little bit more time here, not necessarily here, but we'll spend a little bit more time later, is I want to introduce us to the revenue streams. So for Spotify, that looks like subscriptions for the most part. I know there's ad-based stuff. We'll touch on that when we get to the end of Spotify and add a little caveat to the canvas here. But revenue streams is, how do you make money? How do your customers pay you? So for Spotify, that's subscriptions. If we go back to Apple Music before that, or not Apple Music, sorry, iTunes Store, and you would go on and buy an individual song, the revenue stream would be the classic term that the business model canvas uses is an asset purchase, but we just call it purchases typically. So if you go to Kroger and you buy something, you're purchasing an asset. That asset may be a milk carton or a loaf of bread, but it's that idea that you're purchasing something. So there's a variety of different revenue streams. And so you can think about initially with Tower Records, going back to CDs, you were purchasing a physical asset. When you went to Apple Music, you were purchasing a digital asset, but you were still purchasing an asset. With subscriptions, you're paying for monthly fee. You're paying a monthly fee for access. So whether that's Spotify, Netflix, we have subscriptions out the yin yang nowadays. So there's the subscription model. There's also rental models. There are also fee for service models. There's commission models. There's lots of different ways. We'll touch on more of the revenue streams a little bit later. But for Spotify, at least the outset, the majority of it was subscription based. And we'll touch on the ad caveat. I'll add that in just a minute because that adds a few wrinkles to the canvas that I think are worthwhile exploring a little bit further. So once we look at this right-hand side, this is how we generate revenue. This is how we provide value to our customers. And honestly, if I can see this side of your business model canvas, I have a good inclination of what's going to go on the other side. I have a good idea where you're going to go with this and what you need to do to provide this. Although the uniqueness of the other side still matters very much. This is the side where we need to understand what people want and how do they want it. And we can't necessarily change how everybody behaves. So we need to listen and pay attention and learn, and then craft the strategy accordingly, craft the solution accordingly. Now, when we turn to the other side, you'll see here key activities, key partners, key resources. Key is on here because you have to do a lot of things as a business, right? Like activities, you may have to, find a location for your office. Yes, that's important. Now, is that a key activity? For most of you, no. It may be that some of you get that provided to you from winning this competition and end up working down out of centrifuge or something like that. Finding that space is not necessarily a key activity. For Spotify, the reason I put development up here is, by development, I mean, and I guess development can be a bit nebulous, so forgive me for being a bit vague there. But development here, what I'm talking about is literally the IT background, being able to stream things, being able to compress them, provide digitally high quality files quickly over internet connections, having an app that works well. Basically, the technology development is what I'm talking about here. And so I could have just easily written technology up here. I also put down marketing. I'll add a couple caveats of marketing because this will come up a couple places. Every company is going to have to do some form of marketing. I know you've got companies like Tesla that say they've never done any marketing, but they're doing constant marketing via Elon's Twitter feed and via their relationships with newspapers. So every company is doing marketing at some level. So it's not necessarily a key activity. The reason I would argue it was a key activity for Spotify is because of the economies of scale that kind of needs to happen here. And so if Spotify doesn't get big enough, they don't have sway over some major artists, and so they won't attract more people, which won't attract more artists. They've got a lot of what we call economies of scale. And so marketing becomes a big part of Spotify early on to figure out how do we get enough people on this platform to make it worthwhile. We could actually argue for the marketing, we could add artist recruitment might have been another thing to add up here. To put under this key activities, because if there's not enough music on here, then they don't have unlimited music, and that's really a problem. But the things to remember with key activities is what you do, whereas the next one we're talking about resources is what you have, and the key activities are the ones that really let you deliver on your value proposition. And so marketing is probably a step back from artist recruitment, but their way of recruiting artists was recruiting a lot of users. And once Spotify had a lot of users, it was much easier to get the artists on board, which gave them the ability to deliver unlimited on-demand music. So that's key activities. Like I said, key resources is what you have. So key activities is what you do, key resources is what you have. Now, again, you have lots of things, but what are the key resources? For Spotify, their tech, like we talked about earlier, it's, whether you like your Spotify daily or Spotify weekly, whatever playlist they create for you. But if nothing else, the ease of use and the ability to stream over a lot of different internet connections is very important. Their brand matters a lot. That's something they own that's special and unique. And knowing what you get when you get Spotify, and then their library of songs. And so thinking about if they had 500 songs on there, it's not all that impressive. If you've got 5 million, that's a bigger deal. And so understanding these are the things they need to have or have access to that will enable them to deliver on that value proposition. Again, here you want to think about key resources, as I mentioned. So not necessarily everything you have, but the things you have that allow you to deliver on that value proposition. Lastly, key partners. These are, so if you think about key activity and key resources, these are things you own. These are things inside your firm. Key partners are things outside your firm. So if we look at record labels, that's obviously a key partner because we need access to their music. And if we can't have that library that we want under key resources, if we don't have the record labels, permission, consent, contract, things like that. Similarly, app stores, if our channel, one of our primary channels is going to be through app stores, a lot of times you'll see a key partner being one of the groups that's in the channels that you're providing. So if you've got retail, maybe your key partner is Walmart or Target, perhaps, not necessarily. So thinking about the key partners versus key resources, they should enable you to do your key activities, which deliver your value proposition. And then last on this side, as we think about these things, we can start to think about what costs do we have? What are our cost structures? And so one of the big things we have is royalties. Any music we stream, we have to pay. Spotify has to pay, I can't remember the last I saw, like 0.000014 cents or something. Artists don't make a lot, at least from the royalties. I don't know how much the record labels bring in. But royalties are definitely going to be a part of our cost structure. Tech development is going to be a big part. So we're going to have people inside the firm, most likely, potentially outsource contractors that will develop our technology. And then we'll have marketing. And the reason I have marketing here, again, marketing in a lot of cases are built in. I think it's a bigger deal here just because the economies of scale. And because I had it in key activities, it makes sense for me to have it in cost structure. In a lot of places, we just would leave marketing off the same way we would leave insurance off. In most cases, insurance is not a main part of your cost structure. It is a part of your cost structure. It matters, but it's not something that's going to help you deliver on your value proposition from a customer perspective. So I'm going to take a drink and take a quick pause as you look at the Spotify thing before we add in. We're going to add in the ad revenue. That's too many ads. We're going to include the ad revenue here in a second. I'm going to take a drink and a quick pause. Let me know if you got any questions as I kind of blew through this overview example. All right. So we'll keep rolling. Now, the other thing that's important about Business Model Canvas is most of the time you have one customer segment. In a handful, I don't know what percentage. There are times where you have multiple customer segments that come to you for different value propositions. So a lot of times we use two different colors to signify that these are different things. But in advertising, when you have advertising models, typically you have multiple customer segments because you have a group of advertisers that are paying you for something different than what the other customers are paying you for. So in this case, advertisers as the customer segments are paying for the value proposition of a targeted audience. If I know what music you listen to, then I might know what ad I want to, whether or not I want to advertise to you. The hardcore death metal scene probably doesn't get as many ads for dry cleaning. There's just probably not as much overlap between those people who listen to death metal and those people who want dry cleaning. Similarly, like easy listening probably doesn't get as many ads for face tattoos or face piercings. Now, not exclusively, but that's just an idea of how you can do targeting on music. So as an advertiser, I'm willing to pay because I know I have a targeted audience that I'll have to listen to. Now, advertisers similarly probably aren't at this level being handheld by Spotify. They probably have an ad platform similar to what Facebook or YouTube uses to allow advertisers to place ads in their platform. So for these customer segments, for advertisers, they don't care. Online is kind of how they do it, but there's an ad platform, I would imagine, for Spotify that's in the background that most of us don't ever touch or know exists, that allows advertisers to reach a targeted audience. And for that, advertisers, there may be a subscription model for that. Honestly, I haven't looked into it, but more than likely there's an ad purchase process where they say, I'll pay X number of dollars for this number of ads on your platform. And so you can see how this looks a little differently. Similarly, though, the key partners, key activities, and key resources still fit pretty well for providing that targeted audience. So a lot of times we may only see the different colors on the right side of the canvas because advertisers don't really care about unlimited and on-demand music. They do care about a targeted audience. There are other areas where you have various customer segments that aren't necessarily advertising models, what we call two-sided models, where you need one group to get the other group. Examples of those, you might think of banking. So those of you who have business checking accounts or business banking accounts, you're treated differently by your bank than you might have been treated for your personal account. If you have a personal account, you go into, I don't know how often anybody goes into a bank anymore, but you go into a bank and you need to take out cash, you need to open a new account or something like that. You walk in, you get in line, you walk up to the front. If you're a business user and a business checking account, that's what all those other if you don't know, that's what all those other offices are for on the other half of the bank. They're there making loans to businesses, dealing with businesses, and you'll probably have an individual who, even as a small business, is connected to your bank account there. And so you'd have two different customer segments. You may even have institutional level bankers. So Chase Bank, obviously is a huge company. They've got people who just have accounts with them. They also have mortgages that people have with them that may or may not have checking accounts there. Then they also have institutional level customers who may be investing gobs and gobs of money through Chase or with Chase. or they may be, launching IPOs or things like that as an investment banking type of platform. So they may have a variety of different customer segments that all are looking for different value propositions on there. But the important part for you guys, that's probably beyond what most of you are doing. Although if you have any multi-sided platforms where you may need an advertiser supported model, or you might have two groups that both are coming together at the same time. So we need, if you think about eBay is like this, eBay isn't an advertising model necessarily, but you need a lot of people selling things to have a lot of people buying things. And if you can't get both of those groups, then neither group wants to be there. That's the multi-sided platform model that you see. It's in a lot of areas, and it's here in Spotify as well. You don't want to, they've got it kind of on layers, because people don't want to be on Spotify unless they've got a lot of music, and musicians don't necessarily want to be on Spotify unless they have a lot of people. And then advertisers are another piece that once you've got a lot of people, advertisers can come in. So this is the Spotify model. You can do this with any company. That's the idea of the business model canvas. That's the idea of a model. It's a simplified version of something. The model airplane, it's a simplified version of an airplane. If it's a business model, it's a simplified version. And a canvas is just one page that you can look at and see almost the whole business right here. So as we look at this, here's what I want us to do now. We're going to take a break. Well, not take a break. We're going to break you into breakout sessions. And I know most of you don't have your whole teams here. That's totally fine. This is not necessarily for you to work on your business, but it's for you to get a feel for what this might look like and us to have a little feedback on it. So I want you to fill out basically the right-hand side of the canvas. So the customer segments, value propositions, channels, customer relationships, revenue streams, and if you have time, cost structure for Yeti coolers. So think about if you were filling out the business model canvas, Yeti coolers, I want you to fill out that right-hand side. And then if you have time, go to cost structure. I'm only going to give you about 5 minutes to get through this, but I think this will give us a little bit of time, a little bit of feedback, and a little bit of way to have some conversation about some of the stickier points that may come up with some of these once you go to actually do it. So I'm going to have Zaina break you into, like I said, there are going to be random groups, other people here in the call with you to work through this for about 5 minutes or so, and then we'll come back together and talk a little bit more. So Zaina, if you want to go ahead and do that now.
Yep, I've set it up into 3 randomly assigned breakout groups of 4. So, oh wait, actually, I think I need to move things around just a little bit. So give me a second, and then I'll send you guys over.
All right. So, and I think in your breakouts, I don't know for sure. I think in the breakouts, you'll still be able to see this slide. I'll leave this slide up. Or actually, I'll give you the next slide so you can see where they go. But it's basically that right-hand side of the canvas. Value propositions, customer relationships, segments, channels, and revenue streams. And then if you have time, cost structures. So write those down as you fill them out on whatever you got in front of you, type up some notes or whatever, and we'll come back and share and talk about any issues we have between the 3 groups.
All right, I'm sending you all into your rooms now.
We'll give you about 5 minutes. Welcome back, those of you who joined us. A few more living out those last 60 seconds of their best life in their breakout groups, and we'll jump back in here in a minute and be prepared. I'm going to be asking for your take on each of these. So somebody in your group is going to have to speak up, and actually we might use the chat a little bit. Maybe we'll do a little bit of both and go from there. Zaina, if you can, let me know when everybody's back, when all the groups are closed.
Yep, everyone's back now. It just ended about 2 seconds ago.
Great. My internal clock is perfect. All right, so with Yeti, let's start with customer segments. And I think I mentioned this before, but just to be clear, I start with customer segments because the customer segment, I can define whatever value proposition I am, but then I'm a solution in search of a problem rather than the other way around. Whereas if I start with my customer segments, I can find the problem that they need solved and design my value around it. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So with Yeti, let's actually do this in the chat, because that way we can have each group chime in and you guys can disagree with each other if you want, if you talked about it. What's the customer segment for Yeti? So go ahead and any or everybody, at least one person from each group, put in the chat what the customer segment is for Yeti. Outdoor enthusiasts, okay, that could work. What else? And there should be some variation here. I would expect there to be variation here. So if you're thinking, well, I wasn't thinking outdoor enthusiasts, that doesn't mean you're wrong. Some variation in here is not a problem. There should be at least 3 responses in here though, because we had 3 3 different breakout groups. So somebody besides Bianca and one of the other groups jump in here too. Or if you don't want to use the chat, you can unmute and just holler it out. Someone over age 21, okay. Hunters, fishers, okay. So we could put these in a lot of different categories. And one of the things that we run into issues a little bit with just teaching, this is an overarching concern with teaching these business model canvases. When we pick these businesses that everybody knows or that most people know, when we talk about them, they're usually big enough that they're doing more than one thing. Whereas when you're starting off, you're probably focused on just one customer segment and just one value proposition, because you can't start off huge. You usually start off at a smaller size. So I think we could take any one of these. I think someone over age of 21 isn't quite narrow enough. And so while they may apply to all the, like anyone over 21 or anyone really could buy Yeti equipment or use Yeti equipment, we want to think about who they're targeting. And I think you could go outdoor enthusiasts, you could go hunters and fishers. I think for Yeti, we might want to, those are kind of in the same ballpark. We'll call it outdoor enthusiasts or, something along those lines. And so as we think about those customer segments, let's go next to value propositions. What is the value that Yeti's providing? So again, I want somebody from each group chime in here. So again, we should have at least 3 responses. What would you say the value proposition for Yeti is? What would you have written in there in your Canvas? And if you prefer to unmute and holler it out, like I said, that's an option to you, or put it in the chat. Warranties, okay, that's part of the value proposition. Durable brand built to meet the needs of outdoor enthusiasts. Okay, yep, I'd buy that. What else in the value proposition? What else are they offering these outdoor enthusiasts? One way, a couple of ways we could characterize this is we could say they're offering them, depending on which way you go, cold beer or cold fish. Because the folks I've talked to use Yeti coolers, and initially the idea that I can keep things cold for 10 days, it's like I can take my food or my beer or whatever else out in the woods and it will stay cold for as long as I need to. And I can take anything I catch or kill out in the woods or out on the lake, and I can put it in the cooler and it will stay cool so that I preserve the meat of whatever I've caught. Cotton, that's not a word. But feel free to use it and pretend that a professor told you, so it might be true. All right, so that idea of value proposition. So the warranty is good, the durable brand is good, meeting the needs is good. But a lot of times value proposition, and this is part of the reason I want to do this exercise, is I want to push you to think specifically, what's the value you're giving to these customers? Yeti is giving them, the value they're giving them is keeping things cold. Like at a real basic level, that's what they're delivering on. And so you can think about how, if that's what Yeti does, when they start with their coolers, that's great, but that's also how you get to koozies. I wish I had my, actually, no, here's a Yeti. I didn't even realize I had my Yeti up here. I got the knockoff brands on some of these too. But you get to this when you think about Yeti's good at keeping things cool. If you think, a durable brand to meet the needs of outdoor enthusiasts, yeah, that works. And that might get to this. But if Yeti's good at keeping stuff cool, I like my Coke super cold. So I like it in this. Enjoy a product in an optimal condition. I like that too. That works as well. But you want to think about the value propositions as simply and cleanly as you can, thinking about what do we provide to customers? Why do customers buy a Yeti versus anything else? And it does a really good job of keeping things cold. And the warranty, the durable brand, those things, high quality products we could list in there, all that could fit in that value propositions. I've seen some people who will fill that entire value proposition box with a whole bunch of stuff. To me, again, the canvas is simple and straightforward. And so like, we keep things cold is kind of like, I don't know what Yeti, actually I should know what Yeti's brand is. I think I got it on the earlier slide, or their trademark is, but that's what we think about when we think about Yeti, keeping things really cold, high quality products, probably high price tags. All right, let's talk about channels. What are the channels that you had for Yeti? So type those into the chat again, or you can say them out loud. What did you put down for channels for Yeti? Their website, yep, definitely that's part of their channels. What else? There's at least one other, if not a couple other ones. If you remember, channels is how do we deliver our value proposition? Social media, Instagram. All right, we're gonna hold on to that for a second. That might fit in there as well. Actually, as other people are typing, we'll talk about it, social media and Instagram, I guess. So depending on how you define this box of channels, Obviously, people can't get a cooler via social media or Instagram. Like you can't have it show up to my house. Well, potentially in giveaways, but I mean like with their website, I go to their website, I click buy, they ship to my house. So we could argue channels would also be maybe UPS, FedEx, things like that. Retail is the other main one, Emily. So yeah, that's the other big one is their website, retail, I would say. Now social media, some people, when they define the channel segments, they talk about every aspect of interaction. So how do I become aware of the product? How do I become familiar with the product? In that case, social media and Instagram would definitely fit in there. I tend to keep channels a little bit cleaner and not worry as much about the awareness piece of it, but that is a very legitimate pace. That's kind of a preference thing, a style thing, and how you like to do your business model canvas. But social media, Instagram could fit in there in terms of how people become aware of the product, how people are directed to the website or to retail when they might be able to buy it. And so that could fit under channels. I don't think anybody's going to go crazy whether it's there or not. But if that's the only thing you have, you don't have their website, you don't have the website or retail, then you might have some issues because we want to think about how they actually receive these physical products. From that same token, you could put UPS or the mail as well, because those are going to be actually doing the delivering of those products if you're going their website or direct to consumer. So that's good with channels. Channels is oftentimes the most straightforward because you're really just thinking about how do we put our product in people's hands. And that's an easy, concrete way to think about it. Customer relationships. What would we put here for customer relationships for Yeti? Go ahead in the chat, or like I said, you're always welcome to unmute and share your voice with the world, but the chat works too. Customer relationships, what would we call these for Yeti? And this just doesn't have to be Bianca and Brittany and Emily. Anybody else can chime in here too. You can speak on behalf of your team or just for yourselves. Warranty exchanges, potentially. So that's a piece of it. When they're going direct to the customer, when they're going back direct to the company, they might do warranty or exchanges. But usually with customer relationships, we want to think about what's that initial purchase going to look like. And so for the most part, if it's a retail, a lot of times we would call that self-service or automated type of exchange, because we're not doing a one-on-one sale. We're not having direct interaction. And so you want to think about just how well is Yeti going to know their customer? How are they going to get to know them? And they're not really going to get to know them personally. It's not going to be that much of a personal exchange. It's going to be either automated or it's going to potentially be self-service. The warranty exchanges might come back, and that would be where they might build some of that relationship. But that's where customer relationships can be a little bit tricky for people, because we want to put too much into there. We want to think about like, well, how do I get to know the brand? How do I get to know if these people are good? And that's where warranties and exchanges would come in. But really, customer relationships, you just want to think about at the initial purchase and in my interactions, are my interactions like detailed? And you want to think about this. One of the big things that we struggle with typically, especially younger folks struggle with, is our experience is almost exclusively as a consumer in a B2C type experience. In B2B experiences, customer relationships can mean a whole lot more and can be a lot more central. And so you would have a lot more individual selling. For example, imagine you're selling a software application that's enterprise level security for Procter & Gamble. So P&G is going to buy, a firewall. Well, that's not going to be something they go like on a website, click, oh, purchase firewall, click, and that's for all of P&G. That's going to be a multi-million-dollar purchase. That's going to be a relationship building experience between who's ever selling that software at that level to P&G. And so there's going to be a personal relationship there. And so those personal relationships happen a lot more than you think about it, but a lot of that is in B2B contexts. Whereas in the B2C context, a lot of it is more automated and self-service. So that's where customer relationships, I spent a lot of time talking about it here for the last minute, but it's a lot simpler than we need to make it necessarily. All right, let's talk about revenue streams. So revenue streams for Yeti, put it in the chat or in the, or go ahead and say it out loud. Let's get the revenue streams and we'll kind of land this plane here. What are the revenue streams for Yeti? Sales from products, yep. We don't really need to overcomplicate this. They sell stuff, we buy stuff. They sell products. So here's how I would summarize it. So durable coolers, very self-service or online, retailer online, as we talked about. I said outdoors people. I'm trying to remember the exact words we had used initially. Outdoor enthusiasts, hunters, fishers, campers, etc. They make product sales. Now the B2B distributor contracts, Michael, you might know this more than I am, so feel free. If they've got contracts with B2B where they're doing, so I guess what I'm asking, Michael, is by that, do you mean that they are selling to wholesalers who then distribute? So like, whether it's a wholesaler or whether it's like Bass Pro Shops, I would lump them in with retail, even if there's another step in that process. But if there are B2B distributors who are then selling Yeti stuff to, I don't know who, tell me a little bit more about that. You might be right, Michael. I might just not know Yeti well enough to know every bit of it. But what do you mean by that, Michael?
I more so was meaning like retail. So I'm pretty sure you can find them in Target, Cabela's, like Walmart, Bass Pro. They also might have some like customization things. So if specific companies want to customize it to their company and then hand them out to employees and stuff, that also might be something they do.
Yeah, so the first one I would lump under retail, and even though there are middlemen there, I'd still say that. But that second one, that's what I was leaning towards. If Yeti has some sort of custom arm that, you know, P&G could go to Yeti and say, look, we want to make a P&G specific Yeti cooler that we're going to give to our top 10,000 employees. Can you run with that? That would look like, we'd probably look at that almost as a different customer segment, kind of like what we did with the second half of Spotify. So that's a good point. And that honestly, that probably didn't come up initially in Yeti, but that might be something they're into now. And they may have a corporate arm that they build out specific products for and do, in essence, smaller production runs and do things like that that are customized. And then that'd still look like the B2B distributor contracts. We'd still call that a product sale. But the customer relationships might look differently. The segments would look different. The channels would look different. The value proposition might be the same, but might have a little bit of additional stuff to it. But if we're talking about we sell to a wholesaler who then sells to Target or Walmart, or we sell to Bass Pro and they resell it, we'd still lump that under the retail channels. We still call that product sales. So, but that's a good point to bring up. Now I put the cost structure in here because in the sake of time, I want to hit a few more things and keep us rolling here. But big things with the cost structure. To do that, they have to have good R&D. They have to actually make the products, that's production, and they have to do some marketing here. Again, marketing I was on the fence on. I wouldn't necessarily include marketing here, but maybe potentially marketing being a piece of their cost structure that's important for them. So as we look at this, I didn't go through key activities, key partners, key resources, because like I said, we can figure this out more later, but this is the parts I wanted us to talk through. Based on what we've said here, responses or conversations you had, any questions on these areas as far as Yeti is concerned, or more in general as you started to think through it for Yeti and potentially started to think through it for yourself? Okay, from here, I want to touch on a couple of things real quickly to, I want to touch on customer segments real quickly. I know you guys have talked about this with customer jobs, pains and gains with Mike, I think week 2 even. But to me, customer segments and value propositions are the things you've got to get right off the bat, and then you play with revenue streams. And so that's what we're going to talk about the next couple slides here. So customer segments, the icons I've got up here. The first one is with customer segments, you want to think you are observing. You want to pay attention to what customer needs are. You want to pay attention to what customers want. What you'll find when you get into pitches and things like that, when you get into serious investors, a lot of them will look at it and say, like, if you hear the word that sounds like behavior modification, that's like a death knell to a pitch. When you hear investors get worried when you have to change the way people live their lives, when what your product does makes the way they live their lives easier, that's all the better. And so that's where observing comes in, is you want to look at what people are doing and say, how do I fit into their life the way they want it to? How do I solve the problem they're doing better? As opposed to saying, well, now instead of doing X, they have to do Y, and then my product helps them. That gets a lot harder. That's some of the beauty of, you know, Apple Music, as we've talked through the music evolution. Again, Tower Records, people were going to stores. Apple came along and said you can download music. Now, had Apple done that without Napster in the middle, where there's a whole generation, basically my generation, that was downloading music illegally, Apple came along and said, hey, you're doing that. Instead of going to Napster, instead of going to the countless others that came up after Napster, come to Apple Music and you can do it legally. It became a whole lot easier to just say, oh, well, I'm still downloading on my computer. I'm still doing the same thing I was doing, only now I'm paying for it and it's legal. That's great. And so that's where you want to focus on observation. And the other reason I've got number one up here is for the vast majority of you, if not all of you, I don't know all your ideas, you want to focus on one customer segment. If you're trying to serve too many things, you're going to run into trouble real quick. Now, the exception to that is if you have a multi-sided market, you have to serve both because one is only going to be there if the other's there. Like advertising is a classic multi-sided market. You can't have advertisers if you don't have eyeballs or ears in the case of Spotify. But focusing on more than one customer segment right off the bat is just going to make it you're going to see divergent needs and you're going to be pulled in two directions without really doing a good job of satisfying one. And that goes to the next sign I've got up there, which is narrow your focus. So you may say, well, I really want to serve veterans. It's like, okay, veterans sounds like a cohesive whole, but it's not. Do we want to say, is it disabled veterans we're aiming at? Is it able-bodied veterans that are re-entering the workforce? Is it retired veterans? Is there a way I can narrow this so I know that I've got a clear picture of what that group needs? And all this narrow and focus, you might say, well, like, I want to do a big business, a big idea. Even those big ideas started really small with one group of people. Airbnb started with serving conference attendees. That was their thought process. And so when you think through who your customer segments are, think about focusing. And then lastly, I've got jobs in there. Focus on what they want to get done. This again goes a little bit to the behavior modification stuff or avoiding behavior modification. What are these people trying to accomplish? If I have an idea what they're trying to get done and I can help them solve that, that's where I'm in good shape. So customer segments, the other piece I want to hit on is value propositions. This is where we get to be creative. This is where we get to think up solutions. And you guys have already started to work on this a little bit. But thinking through value propositions, this is where we start to think about, okay, which jobs can I solve? How can I solve them differently that still fit into the way people's lives work? One of the examples I've heard recently is like, it hasn't been as popular during the pandemic, but you think of like the Lime scooters or Bird scooters, those scooter share programs, they were doing in a much better way what Segway was trying to do in the 90s. Now, if you don't know what Segway is, you may have seen them like in a downtown tour type of thing. And they're big and clunky, but that was Segway's vision was for what Bird and Lime scooters are doing, but they didn't solve it in a way that made sense. They didn't have a solution to the problem of people want to get from place to place. They don't need a car all the time, but they need a way to move around the city a little bit better. Lime and Bird scooters came along and have done that much more creatively, much more cost effectively, and really had a solution that fit more into people's lives and thinking about, well, if I'm going to own this big, massive machine that's super expensive, where am I going to store it? How am I going to move? Like, can I actually use it on a sidewalk? All those things. So you want to think creatively, you want to consider different solutions. And the first one here is really talking about design. This is where you get to design what you're bringing to the table. And that's where those first two pieces you guys have already talked about more in detail. But the piece I want to spend a little bit of time here before we wrap up in a little bit is revenue streams. So revenue streams is a great way that we can think about innovation and a great way that we can think about how do we provide things in a way that makes sense for our consumers. So I think I've got all P&G brands up there, but I could be wrong. Product sales, and this isn't just shilling to a sponsor. This is oddly enough a slide I've used other places, but it works out well that our sponsor is P&G. So product sales, we get that one. That one's one of the easiest ones, whether it's product sales, or asset sales, however you want to call it. That's a straightforward model. Now, what if we change it to usage fees? So usage fees like cell networks, like you're paying or someone for you is paying a contract, which we could call a subscription, but it's really a usage fee for the most part. That's why they talk about unlimited data, is that gives you unlimited usage. But if you're like me and still a bit old school and have some data cap on how much data you can use in a month, I pay for how much data I use. That's the usage fee on a cell phone. You can think about this other ways in different types of renting that can come in. So I rented a U-Haul recently. I paid a certain amount to rent the U-Haul, but then I also paid for how many miles I used of the U-Haul. And so that was a rental revenue stream combined with a usage revenue stream. Advertising, I put Facebook up here. They're one of the biggest, Google and Facebook are the biggest advertising platforms in the world. And so thinking about advertising, that's where we should probably go to, but pretty much anything on the internet is using advertising to supply you with something. And so thinking about advertising models are almost by definition two-sided models. So you need eyes or ears, and you need people who are going to pay to reach those eyes and ears. But that's another way we could imagine doing these things. Licensing, do you have some intellectual property that's worth licensing out? Now, NCAA is losing some of that, as they've now, NCAA athletes can now use their own images and likenesses and licensing deals. But I work at Miami. If I have a Miami branded shirt, which I'm not wearing right now, I've got a licensing deal. And I could pay money to Miami, potentially NCAA, to anybody else along the way to use their logo or their brand. Now we could take that a step further and think about your cell phones. There's a lot of different technology in these cell phones that aren't just from Apple. Apple doesn't own every piece of technology. I mean, they own every piece of technology in here, but some of it they've had to pay to license. Some of that technology, they're paying dollars or cents for each one they put together to license some of that technology from other players. And patents come in with that and things like that, but there's lots of different licensing deals that could occur. Subscriptions, we're very familiar with. Netflix comes along. The reason I use Netflix specifically as an example here is you think about Blockbuster and Netflix. Like Blockbuster was DVD rentals before Netflix. Some of you may not have been around enough to experience that, but the idea that all Netflix did was they changed the way they went about a revenue stream, and that brought an entirely different business to light. The entertainment industry we have today is fundamentally shaped by the idea that Netflix looked at DVD rentals and said, what if we change the revenue stream to subscriptions? How does that change the game? And if you go back, whether this is real or not, but the CEO, the founder of Netflix would tell you, well, I had so many late fees and I want to get rid of the late fees. And one of the ways to get rid of late fees is moving to subscriptions. If you got subscriptions, you don't have late fees anymore because you've paid it on a regular basis. By just that one tweak of a revenue stream, you have a new business in Netflix, which leads us to streaming, which leads us to all the entertainment we experience today. So thinking about the ripple effects of changing just one of these revenue streams can be a huge difference. Product sales, give you an idea. Another idea that subscriptions kind of drove this as well. Gillette, a P&G product, has just dominated the razor blade industry for years, decades. A group of MBA students, I believe it was MBA students out of Stanford, had a business model competition type of thing like we're doing here, came up with the idea for Dollar Shave Club, made a YouTube video that was pretty funny, and outsourced everything else. Razor blades were manufactured in China. They shipped them directly. They did everything else outsourced. 5 to 7 years later, they sell for $100 million to Unilever, one of P&G's main competitors, because they were starting to make a dent in Gillette sales. They came at Gillette as this tiny competitor, but they switched it from a product sales model to a subscription model, and they found a lot of traction there. And so you can start to see how a change in one piece of the model can start to change a lot of the other ones. And that's the last thing I want us to focus on a little bit. I'm not going to send us back into breakout groups just because of the timing of this. And I want to leave a little bit of time for questions at the end and whatnot. But if we thought about changing the revenue stream for Yeti, how could we change the revenue stream for Yeti? So if we think, we initially said product sales, but what if we considered for Yeti what an advertising model might look like for Yeti? It may not make a lot of sense, but it starts to give us a little idea. So if we think an advertising model for Yeti, so if instead of selling their products, what if they gave their products away, but in giving their products away, like it would be giving away a Yeti cooler that was wrapped in Coke labels. So it had, Coca-Cola wrapped all around it, or, Bud Light, Miller Lite, Anheuser-Busch, anything like that. So it's like every cooler that's walking around is a walking advertisement for one of these brands. Probably not as lucrative, but you can start to see how that starts to shift different things in the business model. If we go back here again, if instead of product sales down at the bottom, we imagine that is advertising, well, then one of the main customer segments we got to have is those advertisers. And the value proposition is their logo being all over the place. But then the customer relationships, it probably looks a little different. It's probably not so much self-service for those advertisers. It's probably more B2B relationship building. And so we could imagine all these Yeti coolers or all these, these Yeti tumblers or Yeti koozies that are, what if instead of Yeti koozies that were just silver, we've got Yeti coolers that all say White Claw on them. Whether you're drinking a White Claw or not, it makes it look like you're drinking a White Claw, and that's a lot of advertising. Maybe that works out, maybe not. But you can start to see how the model might change a bit, and it might become more lucrative that way. For Yeti, what if we did a licensing deal? That goes a little bit to what Michael was talking about, of what if we worked with individual companies and we let them put their stuff on our products that were really high-end products, because Yetis are pretty high-end. And they were rewards or gifts for people that they could only be got that way. That might be something really useful. Imagine a usage fee for Yetis. What if instead of selling a $300 cooler, we sold $500 coolers to outfitting like camping sites or boating docks or things like that, that you can go out when you're going out fishing, you can rent the Yeti and you rent it by the hour. And so Yeti's got a way that they can keep those coolers that people don't use all that much. I don't think there's a lot of people who are using their Yeti coolers every single day. So if we can think about, well, we can make a lot fewer, or we can make fewer Yetis, but we can rent them out so they can get more use out of them. They're really durable, so you can't really hurt a Yeti. So I think that was one of their advertisements, was seeing a Sasquatch attack a cooler or something like that. We could think about that as a lending or renting model or a usage fee model. Subscription's a little bit harder for me. Subscription model with a Yeti, I don't know how well that would work. But you can start to see, the reason I want to walk you through this is you start to see hopefully how these business models might change. So if we're Yeti and we're thinking of a rental model, well, then our customer segments might be outdoors people still, but our customer segments might be, our channels might be, instead of retail or online, we might want to instead be at campsites. We might want to have our own physical stores or physical rental places or things like that. We would think our value propositions might be similar, but with the revenue streams changing, that might change our key activities. We might need to locate the places that we need to deliver these Yetis and things like that. So as we think through each of these, and more so as you all think through what you're working on, you want to start playing with these revenue models, these revenue streams. I would imagine most, if not all of you, are pre-revenue, but starting to think about, how would this shift if we tried product sales? How would this shift if we tried licensing instead? And how would that ripple into the other boxes in our business model canvas? Even if you think, well, it's obvious, we're going to do product sales. Well, it was obvious for Gillette, and then Dollar Shave Club comes along, and that changes the whole game. It was obvious for Blockbuster, then Netflix comes along, and that changes the whole game. Usage fees have evolved with phones as well. Initially, we had limits on how much we could talk. Then we had limits on how much we could text. Most of that's unlimited now, and we're paying for data. What's going to be the next thing in cell phones? I don't know. But that's where the innovation, that's where the design piece comes in those value propositions, as well as in the revenue streams, to think about how do we change those things. So one last thing I want to touch on is the cost structure piece. And I don't have a slide for this, forgive me, but the cost structure piece I want to talk about is, as you start to think about all these things, you got to start thinking about what you need to pay for. What do you need to buy? What do you need to rent? What do you need to own to deliver on these value propositions? And so altering your revenue streams can get to that as well. But thinking through on your cost structure side, the revenue streams, as we talk through iterating these on Yeti, we want to think about, well, if we need to do these extra things to deliver on a rental model, we need to identify locations, we need to have people stocking or working there. That drives up maybe our labor costs. We can start to see how those things that we work on one side of the canvas ripple into the other side and then trickle down into the cost structure. And so if we're thinking about our cost structures, one of the things you're going to want to start thinking about as you fill this in is, what are we going to need to pay for? And is there potential in these revenue streams to at least eventually overcome the cost of what we're paying for? So if we go back to Spotify, what we might be looking at is, there's a lot of development to build an app and to build a website that works. We need to get a good chunk of people to be able to pay for all the money we're putting in that development. On the other hand, if we're making stuff, building things out, building 10,000 units may be doable. We can outsource that and we can pay for it that way. And we can sell those assets for more than it costs us. but thinking about the structure of your key activities and your key resources and how those trickle into your cost structures will help you finish all this out. So as we're wrapping up here, we talked through some of this. Your homework for this week is I want you to develop a business model canvas for your team. And so you'll work through those 9 boxes, and you can find it on Strategizer. I don't know if, Zane, I don't know if you guys have provided that for them. I can also provide a link. It's in these notes as well as anywhere. The whole point is that you would be able to do this easily. So you can follow any of these slides. I know they've been on Mike's earlier slides too, but you can also find on Strategizer, and Zaina might be able to email you a business model canvas to fill out as well. She's saying yes to that. Also, if you haven't seen the chat, there's a survey on there to fill out for this session or for something. I don't know what it's for, but Zaina wants you to fill out a survey. So I'll mention that too. But your homework, like I said, the business model canvas, and the point of the business model canvas is, one point I didn't mention about the business model canvas is most of you, if not all of you, are on a team, I think. One of the things that the business model canvas really helps you identify is where you guys agree and where you don't. So if this didn't happen when you're talking about Yeti, and you might say, oh, it's outdoor enthusiasts, and the other person's like, no, it's fishermen. That's totally different. You might have for your business saying, oh, our target is small to medium-sized companies. The other person's like, wait, what do you mean small to medium-sized companies? I thought we were talking about like big companies, like P&G is who we're going after. And that's a good conversation for you to have. What you write down, this may sound odd to say your homework is, what you write down doesn't matter for your homework. What you write down is not the important part. The thoughts that go behind it is the important part. And it enables you to have conversations among your team, as well as with any of your mentors or advisors, for them to look at it and say, okay, you said outdoor enthusiasts. What does that mean? Do you guys know what that means? Are you targeting the same people? Are you talking to the same people? So work with your team on this, even if it is working, disjointedly or separately, iteratively, but make sure you guys are all seeing this together and being able to have any conversation you need to about it. So that said, I want to end with a few questions here. So poll number 3, which segment are you most confident in? So as you look at those business model segments, customer segments, value prop, I left off the left-hand side. Customer segments, value proposition, revenue streams, channels, customer relationships, cost structure. As you think about your business, which one do you feel like you most well know what you're doing? That you feel like is most solidified for your idea? Not like you understand the concept as I've explained them, but like as you think about your business, which one of these segments are you like, yeah, I think we really know who our customers are? Or like, we've got a really good firm grip on our revenue streams, but we might be tweaking some of the other ones. Whatever segment do you feel like you most understand for your business at this current time? So let's see where we end up. Customer segments, value props, relationships, cost structure. Okay. That's what I would expect you for most of them. Play with the revenue streams. I'm kind of glad you're not confident in the revenue streams, because that's one of the ones that we can play with the most. Cost structure, as you evaluate things, this is another thing to keep in mind with the canvas. As you change things, that'll affect your cost structure. Make sure you're iterating on that as well, and going through there. And then I think that's all I got for you. So I'll hang out here. I think we're scheduled till 11:30. If you want to use the time, I'll sit here till then. And if you got any questions, whether it's about your stuff specifically, I'm happy to chat with you about, or whether it's general, hey, I didn't quite get what you meant by channels, I'll hang out here. But one more reminder, fill out the survey that Zaina put in the chat. You'll get these slides later. I'll put them in a PDF, and Zaina will send them out like she normally does. And your homework was filling out a business model canvas for your company. And I think that'll go into your mentors or to Zand or anyone else who takes a look at your homework. So thanks. If I can be of help to any of you, Mike, Zaina, Zan, I think they all have my contact info. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help you. I think this stuff's great. I love what you guys are working on. I love this program, and I do think entrepreneurs change the world, and we need that. So best of luck to all of you. And if I can be of any help, I'll be of help. And if you have any questions, feel free to fire them at the chat, or I'll hang out now. Let's say now,
Awesome.
Zan's got anything else they want to put in.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I do have a couple of announcements. So while I'm talking, if anyone has any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. But anyways, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you again so much, Chris, for being with us today. Another great session. Please remember to fill out the chat or the survey in the chat. As Chris mentioned, we like hearing your guys' feedback. And then a recorded version of the event will be provided as always, and I'll send it out with the slides and any other materials you guys will need to finish your homework. And then tomorrow we have What is Machine Learning with Henrique Avero. So we're super excited for that. So I'll see you guys all tomorrow at noon as well. And I think Chris is hanging out for a couple more minutes, so feel free to stay on and ask him any questions if you have any. Thank you again, everyone.